Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, depending on where you are. We'll wait a couple of seconds to see how many people more join. The number's increasing. The silence is because nobody's speaking, don't worry. All right. All right, let's start now officially. We have 77 people attending. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Sergi Jimenez. I am a lawyer in Spain, happen to be also the chairman of the executive committee of L2b Aviation, which is the organization and international association of lawyers that has convened this webinar. It's the first webinar ever of L2b, so I would ask for your patience and your understanding if we make some mistakes. It's a learning process, I guess, like for many other people around the world these days. L2b, as I said, is an international association of law firms which specialize in aviation law. We have members in 48 countries and around 800 lawyers who specialize throughout the world in aviation matters in all aspects of aviation. We have called for this webinar, of course, to talk about the present situation in actually throughout the world. Today, we will focus on how the situation is in Europe. Certainly the intention, however, is to have another webinar talking about what's going on in the Americas, in Asia, and so on. Hopefully, if we don't commit too many mistakes today, you will join us also for those other events that we will organize. Let me, before I introduce the topics, let me explain very quickly how we envisage this to happen. We want it to be very agile, very dynamic. You will see that we have a limited number of speakers. You are all more than welcome to ask questions. Please do that by writing them down in the tool that Zoom offers us. We have a system and administrator whose face is hidden behind the L2b logo. She will take note of all these questions and draw the speaker's attention to the ones which are relevant to the topics that are being discussed at each point in time. So we will try to address them. We also intend to have, let's say, an oral time to have more interaction. If you want to ask questions, then this would be at the end of today's session, which we expect will take about 1 hour and 15, no more than 90 minutes in total. Of course, if there is a lot of interest and we all engage in interesting discussions on the speakers and on the panelist side, there will be absolutely no problem in extending this time. But on the other hand, we don't want to be boring at all. So having said that, let me quickly introduce the topic. As you presumably all are aware, the situation of the aviation industry all over the world is, well, I hate using adjectives, but probably it's close to catastrophic. Every time we open a newspaper, we consult statistics of IATA or any other international organization. We see that about 2/3 of the world fleet are grounded somewhere, that airlines' revenues are plummeting, that nobody's flying. And what is probably worse is that there is a lot of uncertainty surrounding the situation in the short term, but also in the medium term. Today, with our panelists, we will try to address a number of topics which seem to be relevant in this context from a European perspective. Europe has been one of the areas in the world which was hit after China first, and where probably the impact on aviation was felt also first. Now it's extending everywhere, of course. And to talk about these matters, we have, let me introduce them very quickly. We have on the first Laura Pirellini, a very well-known lawyer in Rome, Italy. She has been in the aviation industry for a long while. I'm not going to say how many years, this wouldn't be polite. And she will help us and enlighten us about, where are we right now? What's the situation in Europe? What kind of measures have the government taken? Confinements, prohibitions to fly, etc. We will then discuss financial aspects of the aviation industry, because of course airlines and airline owners and aircraft owners have seen the disruption of their contracts, since the vast majority of these contracts are subject to English law and usually discussed in the courts of England. We have Jonathan Russell and Ben Graham Evans of Smith, Gambrell and Russell, who will explain to us the main aspects that need to be taken into account from the point of view of English law. My colleague Jaime Fernández of the firm Augusta Abogados in Spain will then take the lead in explaining what the problems are from the point of view of consumer protection. Of course, we all have read in the media and in the newspapers that people are asking to be refunded with their money. They have not been able to fly wherever they wanted. Vacation plans have been interrupted, etc. So we'll spend also some time on that. Christine Kranich of ASD in Germany will then talk a little bit about what the governments are doing in trying to help the industry, with Germany being certainly at the forefront on this. And so we will try to have a general view of the kind of state aid, subsidies, helps, loans, whatever has been and will be used in the next coming months to help this industry. And we will then have a final round in which all the panelists will try to have a kind of a forecast of the next months to come, and if possible of the next years to come. I don't know, there are all sorts of theories running around, from people saying that, well, actually the industry will recover very soon and we will be back to normal within 6 months, while there are other people who think that this will take a lot longer. Maybe that we are going back to the good old days in which the airlines were state-owned and only a few could afford traveling and well, in a more luxurious way. We'll see. So without further introductions, Laura, I would please ask you to, well, begin with an introduction, telling us where are we right now, what actions have been taken by the governments in connection with air travel over the last weeks and months in Europe. Of course, Italy was one of the beginners in this respect. So, Laura, go ahead. Laura, you're muted. Laura, you have to, there we are.
I've removed, I didn't want to interfere. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, good evening, depending on the time zone. I know you are connecting from other areas. And thank you for joining, first of all. Yes, Sergi, our government has been very active. As you said, we are focusing on European Union. As it was expected, the first reaction were at local government. I would divide in three blocks the actions which have been taken by the various government. First, the action meant to prevent the coronavirus spread and meant to protect the health of people. Second, a set of measures meant to support the airlines and their employees, and on this topic we will also come back on the panel of Christine. And the third block of measures is related to passenger rights, which will be also the object of Jaime panel. Starting from the first block, as it was expectable, but to certain event also very sad to see, the first reaction were at local level, meaning that each country has reacted in a single manner. Italy was one of the first, as you mentioned, Sergi. We started on the 30th of January by blocking the flight to and from China. I guess UNIC or a couple of other countries all over Europe did the same. We continued with several measures, either at internal local level and international level. One, of course, of most relevance for our sector was the closure of most of the Italian airport to commercial flight, and it was also a very confusing measure. For instance, it happened that we had to, advise on ferry flight from lessors on taking return of aircraft, which was always allowed from any airport, but this was not clear. The same about business aviation. Speaking about the beginning, 12th of March, when most of the airports were closed. Now situation became clearer, and Italy has never adopted measures preventing air passenger traveling from other European countries to land in our country, unlike Sergi, Spain, but all the passengers coming from outside Italy were subject to quarantine, 14 days quarantine. Plus, there were restrictions within Italy, and therefore this was another reason why the passengers were not peculiarly attracted. Finally, on the 13th of May, as everybody may know, European Commission has adopted a set of recommendations which are very helpful in the attempt of harmonizing back again our sector, which need harmonization, because we need to know flying from one country to the other, whether the same set of rules will be applicable. And in fact, the European Commission encourages the adoption of common rule intend to restart the air transport, of course, in the high protection of the health of people, but in the same time not preventing the regularity of air transport. And as we know, EASA is also adopting a set of recommendations which were expected to be issued today, but I'm afraid are slightly delayed, meant to indicate the recommendation from EASA from a safety viewpoint. And it is interesting to see that differently from what happened in Italy up to the 3rd of June, at European Commission and the EASA level, there will be no recommendation to adopt inside the aircraft a minimum distance between the passengers. 1 meter is the one adopted by Italy, and neither there will be a recommendation to leave any empty seat between the passengers. Unlike these measures adopted by Italy, it seems EASA recommendation will be oriented in the sense of adopting some equipment or tool like the mask or some defenses between the various seats to leave the aircraft full and flying at a full load from the carrier. Nowadays, if you fly from Frankfurt to Italy, you can have the flight full and completely loaded taking off from Frankfurt, and then when taking off from Rome Fiumicino, for instance, having the obligation to leave this difference between these distances between the seats. So as I said, this is going to expire on the 3rd of June, and hopefully harmonization will be following according to EU Commission recommendation. Second, as I mentioned, there are robust measures adopted by the Italian government to support the air transport sector. And by coincidence, we have a new, because it has been just published, the new decree, which has granted financial support to Alitalia, the former flag carrier, but not only, also to all the other airlines. And about this I will speak during the panel of 15, and also to the employees, special social funds called Cassa Integrazione Guadagni, which has been also beneficial to some non-Italian carrier, because it is extended to all carriers who have an establishment or a branch in Italy where they employ Italian employees, and they can benefit of minimum 80% support payment of salaries during this period, which is sensible. Finally, Italy, as you know, has been very active, and maybe not so with the pleasure of the European Commission on the reimbursement of passengers, as not only at the very beginning, since the beginning, the decree were issued to allow the quick reimbursement of all the flight cancelled, but with Article 88 bis of Law Decree of 27/2020, it has been provided to the airline the possibility to reimburse via voucher instead of cash. And as you know, this is being questioned at European level. And with that, I leave the floor to the other panelists, hoping that I have been my deadline and free to, available to answer any question that you would be free to raise. Thank you very much for your attention.
Let me ask a question to the panelists in general, and you may want to talk about your respective countries. Excuse me. What Laura has highlighted is that there has been, every country has been doing, let's say, the war on their own, as we say in Spanish. Unless there is a unified approach, it seems that it will be difficult. Talking from Spain, for example, being the country which is, well, should have started receiving tourists weeks ago, nobody's coming. Well, this is concerning right now, and the industry is very much concerned. But then again, Spain is imposing its own restrictions. Now we have a quarantine here, 14 days. So who is going to come? How is the situation in your, I don't know, in Germany, for example? Christina, can I board the plane and just come over?
No, I mean, we actually had a 14-day quarantine coming from abroad and from all countries, not only, so also EU countries, but that actually got loosened. And also a specific thing in Germany is Germany is divided into 16 states. Each state could have their own rules also for leaving the house, and so that was also all divided. By all had this 14-day quarantine, but that has loosened. And you know what our foreign minister has done, so on Monday he had a video conference with his counterparts in Bulgaria, Greece, Italy, Croatia, Malta, Austria, Portugal, Slovenia, Spain, and Cyprus, in order to discuss how they could open up to leisure travel, especially as the Germans like to travel very much, and they are very concerned that they will not have their summer holiday in Spain or Italy. So they are talking about that, because also Germany has a travel warning for general leisure travel to anywhere in the world. But they want to replace that by country recommendations. And so, there was this meeting on Monday, and I think today he met with all the foreign ministers from the neighboring countries of Germany in order to discuss this topic further. But he still said and I think yesterday we should be very cautious. The summer season will be very different than the years before, but at least there is some progress yeah, on getting to a harmonized approach.
Jonathan and Ben, nobody really knows whether the UK is now a member of the European Union or not. So would your country follow a unified, harmonized approach, if so suggested by the European Commission on the one hand? And then maybe we can start also talking about the issue of the impact on financial transactions concerning aircraft, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment we are broadly following, will follow suit, but at the moment you can still go to the UK without quarantine. The government has said that will start soon. So international arrivals, people arriving from international destinations will have to self-quarantine on arrival in the UK, subject to a list of exceptions. But otherwise, generally, the domestic flights are running as normal, or as normal as they can, with social distancing restrictions. So yeah, I mean, we're kind of behind, obviously behind Germany, slightly behind Spain, but we are following suit.
Mm. So what's what's been the impact on the finance industry, by the way, of this whole story? Have you seen many defaults, problems, renegotiations? How has this been handled in England?
So thanks, Sergey. It's a very unusual situation, really, which we all know and we've heard stated so many times. And when we first talked about this seminar, in fact, the situation was moving so rapidly day by day. One thing that has been consistent to our experience, being lawyers working, principally for airlines and leasing companies and their financiers, is that neither party has exercised it seems to be exercising their legal teeth in kind of really fully formalizing defaults and repossessing aircraft at this stage. Instead, while some default notices we've seen have been served, it's more a question of serving a default notice to protect you legally, and then negotiate to help with the current situation in the existing market, which is unique in that the aircraft are not as marketable or movable as the market is expected to see. So if one lessee isn't paying, there isn't another lessee to go to with the same aircraft. So instead, we've been seeing just countless rent deferral, default cure, kind of forgiveness, forbearance type documentation, and other bits and bobs really associated with the financing packages from lessor, airline, and financier perspective. So everybody's essentially on the same level play field at the moment. As we predict and suspect strongly that as certain areas of the world start opening up and the aircraft become more portable to other lessees, and the lessee doesn't want to continue leasing the aircraft, then that we'll see more movements, and that could be intra operator, so between or it could be intra group, where you've got large airline groups, and they'll start to move with lessor consent and financier consent aircraft within groups. And so that will keep lawyers busy, but it will also, essentially be a transaction. But at the moment, really all we're seeing is dealing with the existing aircraft leasing environment. We're not seeing very many new leases, we are seeing some, it's not completely frozen. And of course, we mustn't forget that a lot of the passenger airlines that have been used to carrying passengers, they might not be carrying passengers at the moment, but they're still carrying freight. So, certain aircraft types are still operating just without passengers. They're operating with large amounts of belly freight, and that keeps some of the aircraft, operating regularly, which some people don't appreciate. And from our US colleagues' perspective, we're still seeing, e-ticket closings, big deals, big new aircraft delivering, be in a unique environment. And of course, the final thing is that we're now starting to see large-scale Chapter 11 filings in jurisdictions where those types of protective insolvency environments are available. We're not really seeing the filings of airlines in states where insolvency is kind of the end, like for instance in the UK, where we don't have the kind of relative protection, relative comfort of a Chapter 11 type environment. It tends to be terminal. And so at the moment, everything is kind of on a soft standstill there in the UK, and I think in a large other number of jurisdictions. On a legal basis, Jonathan and I were talking, and we thought it might be just worth just mentioning briefly concepts in leases that may be relevant that we haven't really seen used. And one would be the force majeure argument, if present, and another one would be a concept of frustration. But again, just before Jonathan summarises those, we haven't really seen anybody run arguments to try and get out of leases from an airline perspective. Certainly from the airline perspective, we've seen them really just strongly negotiating with their lessor counterparts to protect their positions and in this unique, equal, level playing field environment. Jonathan, did you want to, have I missed anything or said anything terrible? Did you want to
Absolutely not, no. But I think just to touch on the points you did mention with regards to force majeure, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will have become overnight experts on force majeure when 12 weeks ago we went into lockdown and this situation really started becoming very serious. But we were asked to evaluate by a lot of clients or whether force majeure clauses within agreements would help negotiate, navigate their way through this. Unfortunately, the reality is that a lot of operating leases don't contain force majeure clauses, so there's little room for manoeuvre there. I suppose sort of at a lower level in terms of commercial contracts that they may have entered into, for example, supply contracts, those agreements may well have force majeure clauses in. Whether they cover COVID pandemic that we're seeing now will be determined based on the drafting of that clause. So they would really need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. The other thing just to quickly touch upon is the English law doctrine of frustration, which provides that a contract can be discharged after its creation if something occurs which renders it impossible, physically or commercially impossible to perform that contract. Again, as Ben mentioned, we haven't seen anyone successfully run frustration as a line of argument to discharge a contract or to terminate a contract. So there may be test cases in the future as the situation hopefully doesn't get worse, but may well continue to get worse. So that again is another live topic which we can perhaps revisit in future webinars.
Thanks, Jonathan. Sergey, was there anything else you wanted to?
You guys, you're in a minority, because you're surrounded by continental European lawyers in this panel. So the concept of force majeure is certainly interesting to all of us. It's kind of in our blood. Well, I wonder whether some thought has been given to an issue that arose in a conversation with a client this morning, which is the following. I mean, usually all these financial and the leases, they contain all these tax clauses, tax indemnity clauses. Everybody relies upon them. What's happening right now is we're wondering whether some of the airlines or many of the airlines may be losing their international airline status, or maybe in the risk of losing this and thereby being subject to paying VAT or other taxes because they're simply not flying. So the famous or the well-known idea of being chiefly on international routes may be disrupted this year. Have you seen this happening, or has somebody come to you with this question?
No, so I mean, I'm fortunate enough to be both within my own team and within L2b and the legal and professional accounting tax advisor network around the globe. I'm surrounded by people cleverer than me. And so people are talking to me all the time about these ideas, but nobody yet, Sergey, has come up with a concern on that. Jonathan, how about you?
No, I mean, I guess it's a valid point, but it's not something that I've seen being run at the moment, no.
Laura, have you been involved in returns of planes or defaults or something in Italy? Laura?
Yes, we are involved, of course, for reason of confidentiality, the experience, but we are involved in both return of aircraft and trying to get deferral from payment or to change the rental provision from a flat monthly rental to hourly, power by the hour. No, you know, I'm sure Ben and Jonathan, you are also familiar in your system. When the situation becomes so difficult as it is now, it could be worth for both parties maintaining the lease agreement alive and the aircraft with a home. It is also the lessor, in the meantime, allowing for a limited number of months during the crisis, the lessee to pay only upon flying of the aircraft, not on a flat basis. So the three, we are involved on return, deferral, and transforming the rental arrangement in power by the hour. So far, as I agree with Ben, the negotiations are mostly smooth, apart a few exceptions, I would say, because there is a common interest to keep the lease alive. I just want to comment on your very good point about the VAT regime of the chief international flight, the zero rate VAT. It could be utilized, the argument that it is used for the startup airlines. I mean, when you don't fly at the beginning, you just make an assumption. If you were to fly, what would have been your revenue composition? This is what is done, for instance, for the new incorporated company in Italy, and it is commonly accepted by our tax authorities. Just an idea, Sergey, because so far, like for Ben and Jonathan, we have not been involved in the discussion, but maybe this could be an argument to use what we are planning to fly in the near future.
Yes, thanks, Laura. As I said, it came up in a conversation this morning. Well, moving on to the issue of consumer protection, passenger claims. A couple of days ago, talking to another client whom I see is among the participants in this webinar, so I hope he won't mind if I quote him. He told me that in this crisis, we are now all feeling that the 15 or 20 euro that the ticket costs are really worth a lot of money because we're having absolutely no revenue. And people are asking us for that money as well. So Jaime, you have been, and you are heavily involved in this kind of matters. What's the perspective? How do you see this? What's going on?
Well, thank you very much, Sergi, for your introduction and the opportunity to take part in this webinar. Well, first of all, I want something which is very interesting for me is numbers, figures, because I think that they let us take more intelligent decisions. It's kind of the driver for our decisions are somehow the numbers, not only the concepts. Here in this situation, we are facing the biggest impact in the industry of the whole story, in terms of revenues that are going to be lost during this year. We can expect figures by IATA around 90 billion euros losses during this year. And worse than that is that, as you mentioned before, we are moving now in a very uncertain scenario for next year. There might be expectations, but it doesn't look as reasonable bet that we are recovering situation of 2019 before 2021 or 2022, the soonest. So in this situation, the problems that we are facing in consumer protection discussion are even worse than before, because it's now really going to be hard with this level of losses to refund this 20 euro ticket. Regardless the right that this passenger might have, which is something that I would like to discuss as well. But the global amount of this 20 euro ticket, in the case of a low cost, is the calculations of IATA is more than 30 billion euros in refunds, 30 billion euros in refunds, which might imply a significant risk for against the sustainability of the airlines. So we would all share the view that if we don't have airlines because they are not sustainable, we don't have passengers, we don't have passenger rights. So I think it's good, good idea to keep in mind when we consider how national authorities, state members, but also Commission are becoming aware of the situation and taking some measures, which, in my opinion, that's not still the end of the story. We will need and see how it's going to progress, especially in relation to the ticket refund. I'm now just trying to cover two or three main issues of our passenger protection regulation that, as you know, is covered in very popular 261 regulation. First of all is the right to care assistance that had to be rendered at the very beginning of the situation, because that was an issue that's not really an issue anymore, maybe not right now, but this right to care was a critical issue at the beginning. Then the Commission helped the aviation when said at the beginning, those were guidelines issued by the Commission in March, saying that, confirming that right to care was applicable even when there was this very big disruption, which was somehow anyway insisting on the concept of the regulation itself and some precedents of the European Court of Justice. However, the Commission said also that the principle of proportionality had to be considered. This is a key idea here. We need to be proportional. We need to make a reasonable interpretation of the consumer protection now, because otherwise I insist, the risk that we all get crazy. We try to protect passengers in terms of right to care during 2 or 3 months before they can get to final destination, and this would not make any sense at all. That's why Commission ruled those guidelines, which were helpful in this regard. Then there's another concept which is also very critical in consumer protection, which is the right to compensation. It's clear now, but at the beginning there was huge discussions, especially because of, I insist, because of the amount and their discussion there, whether EU 261 compensations, the set amount, the fixed sum, were going to be applicable or not. Well, the Commission as well, and also some national authorities confirmed that COVID-19 was clearly a situation beyond the control of airlines, and even when they had taken reasonable measures according to EU 261 regulation, the situation or the effects of that situation could not have been avoided. Therefore, no way, no chance to compensation. But again, in addition to that, the compensation was very useful when saying that it didn't affect only flights that had to be cancelled because of a legal prohibition, but also some other situations that at that time made the airline have clear doubts on whether operating or not a certain flight. So it was very open in the description of the scope of the extraordinary circumstance that would exclude liability. And this is the second idea, which is very important. And then the third issue, which is the ticket refund, which is hot topic now, as you might know, because of the importance of the amount, the global amount and the discussion. That's something that I consider that is open, because I think that, as Laura was saying at the beginning, we need an harmonized solution to something which is subject to an harmonized regulation. in many other areas, national authorities could take measures because they had competence, national competence in healthy measures or many other measures of movement of people. In consumer protection, our regulation is an European regulation, set basically EU 261. And then it's going to be the Commission at the end or at some point in potential review of 261, which is, as you know, under assessment now, that we will need fixed rules in order to cover maybe in a better way situation like that we are facing now. However, what's the situation now? Some national authorities, some member states like Italy or Spain, they are taking measures in order to try to protect airlines. Particularly, I like to give the floor to Laura to explain this measure in Italy because it was very surprising and very interesting for the industry. In case of Spain, we had a 60-day period to have negotiations before obliging airlines to refund the tickets, which was also very interesting. And in the case of the Commission, initially they received a letter from some state members, was around 12 or 13 state members claiming the Commission to take measures in order to allow the vouchers instead of the refund. And the Commission has very recently addressed the issue somehow against the state members, trying to have clarifications on whether they are going to take measures in this line, because that might be a kind of infringement of EU 261. So there's this kind of fight between the interest of airlines, which clearly support the idea of vouchers instead of refund, the efforts by some state members in order to promote vouchers instead of refunds, and the situation of the Commission, which is still to be done. And that's kind of political situation of this controversial issue. In addition, I think that there is going to be a legal issue as well, maybe in the next month, on the interpretation of EU 261 in this regard, Section 8, which is not, in my opinion, this is not absolutely clear, that airlines have a real obligation to refund tickets in current situation when they cannot offer alternative transportation. That's, I mean, in our interpretation, if it's not possible for an airline to provide with alternative transportation, which is letters B and C of the regulation, of Section 8 of the regulation, it shouldn't be obliged to process the refund, which is letter A, with a systematic interpretation of this regulation. So something will come, maybe in the European Court of Justice, or maybe with a change of regulation, which obviously would avoid further problems and further litigation in this regard.
Laura, Jaime asked, well, mentioned Italy, because the Italian government, the Italian authorities have taken their own approach.
Yes, as I mentioned, there has been a focus since the beginning. We had many articles in February already, then this one in April. Starting from the first one, Italy was one of the first countries taking position when it was the cancellation came from the passenger, no? So allowing the voucher when the cancellation was decided by the passenger, even though based on the coronavirus situation. Now with this article 8080 bis of law 27/2020, our government, it is interesting to see that it was a decision from the government, not from the Italian MEB. As you may be aware, our MEB, ENAC, is always very, very sensitive towards the right of passengers. So this decision was inserted in the law decree called Care Italy, Cura Italia, and not in a special provision related to the air transport. The reason why is clear to everybody. I mean, it is to support airlines to avoid that the reimbursement and the cash needed for the reimbursement in a period where they are out of cash would meant their insolvency. Since the beginning, Sergei, you know, because we discussed this several times, I've been always struggled between the clear, you know, disconnection between the high level of protection which is given to the passenger in a normal situation and the total lack of protection in case of insolvency. because in case of insolvency, the passenger right of reimbursement or 261 indemnity compensation is an unsecured credit, and therefore in normal bankruptcy, unfortunately, we have seen over the years and in recent years, this means that the passenger will get zero out of their payment. So a balance, as always we have said, has to be introduced, and I totally agree with Jaime that this situation of the reimbursement in a moment where airlines are facing really one of the worst crises we have never seen, must be resolved at a higher solution, either European or local government, but with the risk to be against 261 or European Commission. But if left to the single airline, it could give rise to zero protection for the passenger, because most of the airlines will fail to reimburse because they don't have cash. Vice versa, one could argue, but if the passenger receive a voucher, who's securing the passenger that in future this voucher can really be spent if the airline were to file? This could be a matter of special funds on the charge of government, insurance, price ticket, I don't know, because this is the risk, of course. Now there is a shortfall in the cash flow for the airlines. In future, there could be a risk for the passenger not to be able to really use the ticket for the voucher received. A balance has to be found, and so certainly I agree with Jaime, further discussion are needed. We cannot simply have this discussion from the recommendation of the EU Commission and local decision like the one of Italy or the Netherlands.
Christina, how does it look in Germany? Has Germany also issued its own laws, regulations, which may be even contrary to European law, like the Italians seem to have done? I'm being very cautious in my formulation, as you can.
No, actually not, but they are very much lobbying, I mean, at least some politicians and also in the government party lobbying for a voucher solution, and yeah, and try, and as we all know, it's not seen as a solution by the European Commission, but I was on a video conference last Friday, I think it was, with a politician from the government, and it was about how German aviation will evolve, and there he promised at least that they will do their utmost to try to get it to a voucher solution, because I mean, I think the number there in place, it's 1.8 billion euros of refunds which European airlines would have to do otherwise, and it's still open, but at least in Germany we are trying also to get to a better solution, but it should be a unified approach, as we discussed before.
Well, since we have you now on the microphone, the German government has been among the first to start pouring money, tons of money, into the airline industry. If my information is correct, only 4 billion just for Lufthansa, and there are other airlines.
It's actually 9 billion.
Oh, 9 billion. Okay,
yes.
So you see, I was too short then.
No.
So how do you see, not just from the German perspective, but from a more European one, all this issue of government assistance, state aids, and so on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me just start with these different measures that actually the German government had issued to help companies, not only airlines, but one is short-time allowance, which was anyway a law, but also had been broadened the application now, which whereby the state pays a certain part of the employees' wages. So in order to prohibit or to protect the workers so that they will not be laid off. And that is one government measure. Then they also deferred tax payments and reduced tax prepayments, and were loosening the rules of enforcement. Then there's also an ongoing discussion on especially the air passenger tax, which was just this year, beginning of this year, heavily increased. And yeah, that is still a discussion. And two other issues, there was also a law enforced that companies that have become illiquid just due to the COVID-19 pandemic do not have to file for insolvency. And this is until 30th of December 2020, but could be even prolonged until 31st of March 2021. And yeah, and then the last thing is the liquidity support, which are mainly government loans by the KfW Bank, or especially, and that has been provided, I want to say, for TUI, which is a big travel organization, which, oh no, my telephone is ringing, I hope you don't hear it. And also has an airline. They received a 1.8 billion, or it was approved, government loan. Then also Condor, which is another German airline, which was already in insolvency proceedings, but under the so-called protective shield proceeding, which means a restructuring. And they were really good prognosis for getting out of that at the beginning of the year, because as you may know, the mother company from Polish airline LOT wanted to invest to Condor, but due to the Corona pandemic, they somehow got out of the deal. Whether it was rightfully or not will be discussed. And they had received already last year a loan, about 300 million, and they could not repay this loan, which was due on 15th of April. And so they got another loan of 550 million from the government, which, so in order to refinance also this first one loan. And then there is this big discussion with Lufthansa. And I have to also, in this context, I want to state that the European Commission had announced on 19th of March already a temporary framework to state aid measures in order to loosen the requirements. And so far, the European Commission approved all government aid programs, which from the member states, which are about 1.9 trillion euros, I've read, and the most part went to Germany so far, 52%. And this, in this temporary framework, the beneficiaries and member states are required to develop an exit strategy, because it shall not be a permanent state-owned airline or a company, so that they should exit after 6 years if it is a publicly listed company, or 7 years for other companies. And also until 75% of the recapitalization is redeemed, there is a strict limitation on remuneration for the management, including a ban on bonus payments. So that should give an incentive of that it's really only a temporary measure, this state involvement. And also in this EU framework, there is it states that the beneficiaries shall be transparent on the use of the government aid, and also should lay down how they apply that to become to link that to green and digital transformation. And to become greener is, as you all know, the big discussion anyway. And that is also, I think, the most important part why Lufthansa has not yet received the government loan, because, yeah, Lufthansa, I think, understandably does not want to have government loan and also government intake or involvement, and want to limit that. On the other side, there, especially our Green Party, is very much lobbying that if the government provides the aid, they should also link that to certain promises from the airline, how they become greener. For example, they also said France did it the right way, because I think they got 7 billion, and it was connected to the obligation to reduce carbon emissions on mid and long-haul flights until 2030 by 50%, and on inter-country flights also by 50% already until 2024.
Christina, let me interject, because sorry for the interruption, but we received 2 questions.
Okay.
One is specifically targeted to you, but I would extend this to all the panelists, and the other one is for all the panelists about this topic.
Mm-hmm.
One participant is asking us if we're aware whether airports have received state aid throughout Europe, because of course airports have also been hit. So this would be question number 1. And the other one, and the second question, comes from our very much esteemed colleague Gonzalo Yelpo in Uruguay, who, Gonzalo, I don't know what time it is in your country, but certainly early. So but he's taken the time to ask us, why are the governments in Europe giving state aid to legacy carriers like Air France, Iberia, Lufthansa, etc., plus payroll schemes, plus tax and airport breaks on charges? Should these state aids not be extended to the privately owned airlines? Gonzalo, I should add that, as Christina just explained, Condor and some other private airlines have received this. But for example, in the UK, and maybe Ben and Jonathan, you want to comment on this, I read the other day that Ryanair has received some funds from the British government. That's interesting.
Yes, so actually, it's obviously an evolving picture, but to our knowledge, the COVID Corporate Finance Fund, emergency liquidity facility available, backed by the UK government, isn't just for UK companies. I mean, it's intended to be for UK companies, companies with significant employment in the UK, firms, companies with their headquarters in the UK. It also will consider applications from companies that generate significant revenue in the UK, have a large number of customers in the UK, or have operating sites in the UK. So it's not strictly UK only. And we've seen some examples. I think Wizz Air has been granted an allocation of funds. Jonathan will know the quantity, I expect. But so that's one thing. And the other thing which is interesting to know, which hooks on to Christine's point about the environment, I think, is that my understanding is that the CCFF, the COVID Corporate Finance Facility, is not linked in any way to environmental targets or performance. And that's been commented on by the national press. So in a nutshell, in the UK, no state aid, formal state aid, has been talked about seriously in terms of British Airways or UK big airlines, and it's not anticipated actually, but instead there will be aid available for those that need it and have viable businesses to take it responsibly. Right. That's the UK. Sorry, John.
Ryanair did accept £600 million in state aid, I think, a couple of days ago, despite Michael O'Leary having previously been quite critical about state aid. So a bit of a flip-flop potentially there. And I think the point that Christine raised in relation to Air France was a comment from the Minister of Finance in Paris, who said that the 7 billion given to Air France should be used to make it become one of the world's greenest airlines. So they're clearly latching onto the potential to use this situation in order to make aviation a more environmentally responsible industry. And certainly there's call from, perhaps no surprises here, but from the likes of Greenpeace to say, well, look, it's okay to give state aid to these airlines, but what about tying it to some form of environmental obligations? Whereas, for example, the emissions for Ryanair, I think it was either Ryanair or EasyJet, had increased so significantly between 2018 and 2019 that there's seemingly no compliance with their environmental obligations, that this is being seen as perhaps the stick to actually force airlines to look at the way in which they, their environmental responsibilities, which I think is will become a much bigger point as this continues.
Right. Anybody aware of any assistance having been given to airports? This was one of the questions.
Yeah, I'm not aware, but I know that they are also, that they somehow, or I read something that they felt forgotten about this whole scheme. I mean, in Germany, it is really state aid also not only, as I mentioned, the legacy carrier, but to all companies which have a significance in total life, whatever that means. And I think, but I read about that the airports also want some government aid, at least in Germany.
In our system, the support for the employees is of course open also to airport, but as to many other airline-related enterprises, whilst the financial support so far has been devoted mostly to the former flag carrier and also to other provided certain requirements are met. And it is, as I said, of today, the new decree, which has provided as a requirement for benefiting of these funds, the application by the requesting airline of the national collective agreement with the minimum wages for the employees. So this is a condition for applying for the support, the financial support which has been granted, as I said today. Apparently, there is no provision related specifically to airport. It is apart from the one for the employees, so the special funds for employees.
Yeah, so from the UK, Sergei, we're not aware of any airports having been awarded any funds, but looking at the kind of pricing of the debt, it varies in the UK depending on how the credit rating is of the applicant. So if you're A1, which very few businesses are these days, you get it at 20 basis points. At A2 it's 40, and A3, which is for the lower credit rating, is 60 basis points. So it could be that it's not competitive, but that would be beyond my experience level in terms of what's competitive in the market at the moment across various funding liquidity sources.
Okay, thanks for your views. Let's move on to the last part of this webinar. We've been talking for about an hour now. Did somebody bring the crystal ball with him or her? What about the future? What are we supposed, or what can we expect without any commitment? It's not a legal opinion. You can have all the waivers you want. One of the questions we received is what do the panelists think? Will the current situation promote a concentration among airlines in the European market? If so, what about free competition in Europe? What would the European Commission say? As I said at the start of this session, other things that we could consider as what's going to happen. We have made a survey, and it looks like in this survey about 70–75% of the participants think that the recovery of the airline industry will take a while, certainly more than 6 months, so that no recovery will take place soon. So with this in mind, what do you think? Jaime,
I'm
do
happy.
you want to start?
Oh, hi.
Oh, no, go ahead, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, so just so I'm willing to have a guess at what might happen in 6 months on the aircraft finance market in terms of trading, and then maybe because we've got our experts here who know more about passenger airline confidence and passenger market and stuff, maybe others on this panel can comment as to their predictions for the future there. But from trading perspective, my view, and Jonathan may disagree, but is that those entities, investors, lessors, and finances that have disposable or committed capital that are just sitting on it and have money to spend, they will be watching for opportunistic transactions of a medium risk and medium to low risk type thing, type profile in the short to medium term. So there'll be a lot of patrolling, I think, for investment opportunities, aircraft and purchases and trades, and putting them into new lease structures as market opens up sporadically. That's my view. So I'm cautiously optimistic as to how the aircraft finance market will respond for those with access to capital. And of course, we're talking about we know a lot of lessors and a lot of financiers have access to capital, and at the moment they're just paused on spending. So we're hoping that there will be more movement on the trading side. But obviously, as we've got the other ladies and gentlemen here to represent other views, maybe I won't hog the floor anymore on that.
Maybe I think there will be reduced fleets because if I also state Lufthansa again, which was also a group of airlines anyway, they had 760 aircraft, and they just recently stayed until 2021, or in 2021 it will be still reduced by 300, and in 2022 the aircraft will be the fleet around 560, and then in 2023 the prognosis is to have 660 jets, which is still 100 less than they have now. So I think there will be a lot of returning of aircraft or not extending leases. And on the other side, which is also one aspect also of this greener and more sustainability, is that I think Airbus and Boeing are maybe lobbying to buy newer environmental friendly aircraft. And I know that also the Airbus CEO stated that to the German government, and instead of paying passenger tax, they should promote that. Maybe that will be also an aspect. But I think that the overall fleet, at least here in Europe, will be reduced.
Let me ask talking about the future, a very naive question to Jaime and then to Laura. Jaime, when are you going and how are you going to board a plane to visit Laura in Rome? And how do you think the plane will look like? Will you be sitting on your own? Will you maybe hire a business jet? What will the airport look like? And Laura, will you come over to Barcelona and visit Jaime in the next month, whenever you were allowed to? How will it look like? What will the experience be? What do you think?
I think that it all will depend on the fare that passengers are in a position to pay. If we want to keep the culture of, that started maybe 20 or 30 years ago with low-cost companies and companies which were not low cost, but improved really a lot and reduced the fares. It won't happen. It simply won't happen. As we all know, margins in aviation with regard to airlines, specifically regarding to airlines, are very, or were very small. There is no margin for these changes. So if we really want a fare which is payable for a weekend experience for young people, it's not going, we can't afford these changes because it won't be sustainable. So it wouldn't happen. Then we need to see now how it's going to change. Same thing happens in our office. I mean, will we have a change in how we work? If people want a change, we will have a change, but then there won't be those type of low cost offers anymore.
First question, yes, I will come to visit you as soon as you invite me, either in Barcelona or in Madrid, even tomorrow. But you know, this is my personal attitude. As far as the passenger attitude, because remember when we jump into this coronavirus nightmare, all the predictions were for enormous increase of passengers, especially in certain areas. We were, as we mentioned before, and I guess you, Jonathan, referred to the aid given to Air France to promote environmental sustainability. This was one of the topics of my last conference attended in person. Now, because the growth of the number of passengers was concerning in terms of sustainability and for the environment, now it seems to be in a completely different, pardon me, playing with the word, a completely different environment. So it much depends on whether or not the passenger will rely again on flying safely, and very much will depend on the communication. So it will be on the state, the government, to provide the right communication. It looks like the European Commission has started with the right step. This EU recommendation of 13 May, have, you know, the right spirit to go forward, and as soon as the consumer will rely again, I believe the market will start again. How long it takes, unfortunately, very much depends on whether or not the prediction of the various doctors, whether or not in autumn we will have, sorry to say, but if there will be another spread of the virus, I'm afraid this will be really delaying, not only, I'm afraid, for the victims and all the pain for families and so on, but also for the air transport. So if we want to be optimistic and assuming that we are really now overcoming this virus spread, I would be confident that the passenger, as soon as become again confident on flying, will go back, because flying and visit the world and the new way in which our son and daughter are used to move with friends to have their vacation will come back. Yesterday I have been for the first time out for dinner with my son, and I have seen Roman already smiling. And despite all the restriction in the restaurant, the 1 meter, there was a lot of, you know, old atmosphere. So let's hope that this will be contagious, not the virus, but the positive attitude of human being.
We have received a couple of questions. One, I will read them and relay them, and then please, if you would like to answer more or less in the same order. One is for Christine. Christine, I'm reading aloud. Given that very few of Lufthansa's aircraft are leased, how do you think will Lufthansa reduce its fleet over the coming years? Because by selling these planes, it might incur into losses. That is one. And then there's another one for Jaime. Jaime, you mentioned that probably due to the coronavirus, airlines may not be able to continue offering low-cost prices. Well, would it not be a good solution to re-incentivize the market to offer low fares and thereby have people flying? And then another one, and that's the third one, I'll keep monitoring this, but would be more for maybe Ben and Jonathan for you to consider, which is, well, do you have any concern about the future of IAG? Are IAG's carriers avoiding state aids to prevent discussions on their ownership and control in the future in the context of Brexit? What do you think? So I would say Christina and then Jaime, and then so give you some time to think about your answers.
Yeah, okay. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, there are not only a few aircraft that are leased with Lufthansa, because I think every airline has, I mean, the smaller anyway have only leased aircraft, but also the bigger ones have a considerable portion of leased aircraft. And I think it's, I don't know exactly how it is with Lufthansa, but I would assume half or at least 1/3 is leased, because that was always is considered because it allows an airline flexibility, because yeah, it has to answer to demand, to low demand or to high demand, and therefore they consider leasing aircraft, and therefore they have also, yeah, and these aircraft leases have different terms, and so that they have some flexibility also, yeah, to return aircraft. But yeah, then what the other option is for our own aircraft to sell them to markets, maybe in Africa or so on, which may not be a very good price right now. But I'm pretty sure that they have a lot of leases and that they have there some flexibility in relation to return.
Thanks, Christina. IAG.
Well,
oh no, sorry, it was Jaime.
no,
Excuse me.
in relation to the incentive, I think, Sergi, that it basically depends on where we put now the effort, because an effort is going to be made, an effort to a certain extent, because as I mentioned before, we want to have airlines, but we also want to have states. So we all need to survive. So the capacity of the states is also going to be damaged in the next month. So capacity to promote is always limited, as it is. But now the issue is to keep airlines alive. Sergio, I mean, that's very interesting to see where we put the money, and that could be great to have a different world where we could do. I think it was the case of Italy, particularly. That's a kind of voucher was given to people, trying to invite them to go to restaurants or to use the money to go out and spend again. But it's a bit difficult from a technical perspective to do that in aviation. And as I said, the crisis here is if too many airlines just fail and just get bankrupted, because we need competition. I mean, people took flights in the last 20 or 30 years because of the fares, and the fares were a result of competition. If there's this concentration, or some airlines or too many airlines just die, I think that the initial effort, the priority should be to put the incentive on the airlines, not the passengers themselves.
Let me ask you a follow-up question that we just received on the vouchers, which is,
yes,
each airline is taking a different approach as regards the term of the vouchers.
Yes.
For how long they will be valid? Shouldn't there not be a unified approach?
The problem with the voucher, or one of the problems with the voucher, is that it's not one of the options foreseen in regulation. It was not foreseen in advance. So we are not trying to offer something which is kind of alternative solution. In our regulation 261, it's a regulation which was passed 16 years ago, 2004, and it changed a lot. I mean, I just want to put the case of the Canadian Act, which got into effect last year, 2019, and they have this regulation with the vouchers. Whenever we have, like here, extraordinary circumstance, companies are not obliged to refund. They are not obliged to refund. They just give the voucher for 12 months, and passengers have the right to take an alternative transportation, which is the right. The right is not to take the money back. If we had this implemented in our regulation, we wouldn't be in trouble now. So I think that the future, the regulation on vouchers will be mandatory and will establish clearly the rules. However, in reply to the question, last week, European Commission on the 13th May, I think, issued recommendations on the contents of the vouchers, and specifically they were recommendations, however, and they explained that the vouchers should expire not earlier than 12 months. So passengers should have at least 12 months to use the voucher. And in case that the voucher was offered for more than that, in the 12-month period, passengers would have the right to decide to take the refund otherwise. So there were very clear recommendations by the Commission. There should be, as Laura was saying, a guarantee for the use of the voucher in case of bankruptcy. So we have a very clear line of improving, but that's clearly soft law. That's only recommendation. What we need in medium term is to have binding regulation, just trying to update what we decided 16 years ago with a new regulation which is more modern, like I mentioned the example of the Canadian Act. I mean, what we have here, kind of the real assistance is to take the passenger to final destination. It's not the refund. I mean, from a material perspective, the issue is to render the right to care and the alternative transportation. This is what materially the passengers need whenever there's a flight disruption, to receive my money back that I cannot spend in getting to final destination because there is no option now. This is not, this was not the purpose of the regulation. So we need to make a change, Sergi, clearly in the regulation.
However, sorry if I may intervene to be a bit interactive. This doesn't look to be the attitude of the Commission so far. If you look at our Article 80 bis, whereby Italian government decided to allow the airlines, even without the consent of the passenger, to reimburse via voucher. And if we see how the Commission is reacting, not so strongly, but attentioning a country like Italy or the Netherlands who have taken this attitude, look like they are not yet mature enough to allow what you are saying. So the compensation via voucher or alternative means of transportation. So we are not yet there with the voucher, but it is already a lot that, at least locally, some countries are taking this decision. And as you know, 12 countries have written to the European Commission, including Spain, France, and other countries, not Italy, because Italy has resolved its own Article 80 bis, exactly to push for alternative to the cash reimbursement.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, Laura, the problem is when we try to take the solution now, there's a fire, we try to extinguish the fire during the fires. So future we will need to take first, measures, but for future incidents. Now it's too hot for the Commission it's a hot topic for the Commission, very difficult now to react in a different manner.
And Jonathan, IAG, will IAG survive? Will it be the proud British Airways only again? What do you think?
Jonathan's going first on this.
Sorry, just remember to unmute myself. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I know that Willie Walsh hasn't been always the greatest fan of state-backed loans, so it's interesting to look at how they're responding. But I know that in Spain, so the Spanish entities, IAG Airlines, so Vueling and Iberia, I think, is it correct, Cindy, they had about 1 billion euros so far of loans, government-backed loans, and I think, unless my reports are incorrect, that they had about 300 million from the UK government's COVID corporate financing facility. I can get those words in the correct order. So they are, you know, I think like everyone, going to be looking for help out as and where they can get it. Obviously, in terms of the UK, that money comes with certain conditions attached. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I mean, obviously, I hope personally that they do survive, and that yeah, that they'll continue. And I think they'll be looking for sources of funding where they can get it. I don't know, Ben, whether you've got different thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that obviously IAG as a concept, or as an owning platform that owns, you know, 2 massive airlines and some smaller ones, you know, whether or not that continues to be viable in the emerging market post-COVID or during COVID is not something that I'm able to really comment on. I mean, people say that, you know, that British Airways has been exceptionally profitable, but, you know, I'm not an investor, I'm not a shareholder. And I don't know whether or not that really is true and what their cash position is. But certainly they have a very strong position compared to many airlines in terms of their liquidity. And so we would expect British Airways to go on without significant, you know, nationalisation or concepts or state support. And I think the UK market will support British Airways. It still likes the passenger market. It is loyal still to British Airways. Across the piece, but that's speaking from a passenger customer perspective, and it's having spoken to a few of their kind of key pilots and things, I think there's optimism about recovery of things for British Airways. I don't know what the position is at Iberia, and because I don't have, you know, lines of communication there. So I would say that if British Airways has difficulties, then it's being one of the stronger airlines. It means every airline is going to have significantly greater difficulties. So we shall see. But IAG as an owning group has so far been successful as far as I can see, and you know, we hope that it continues to be so. But I mean, the one comment I say to add to what Christine was saying about fleet sizes, and of course everybody expects the super large aircraft market to be fully problematic economically and you know, practically going forwards. But so we're talking about the A380 and the, you know, the massive twin aisle aircraft and the 747. So we're expecting those aircraft to, you know, really not to have huge amount of involvement in the recovery of the global airline market for passengers, but at the same time, the cleaner, more modern technology is hopefully going to do even better and will be relied upon even more than perhaps was expected in a shorter time frame. So that was just my view.
All right, thanks, Ben, and thanks, Jonathan. Well, actually, thanks to all the panelists. Let us stop it here. We've consumed 1 hour and 30 minutes, which is quite some time. I would like to thank all the people who have participated in this webinar. Thank you also for the questions that you've been raising. We've tried to answer them to the best of our knowledge. Hopefully we'll invite you to a follow-up panel on shortly to talk about other regions in the world which are facing very much the same problems we're facing in Europe. The wide reach of L2b allows us to do this rather easily. It's more a question of technology and finding the holes in our diaries, which as lawyers are nowadays pretty much booked. Well, thank you, Christina. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Jonathan, Jaime, and Ben. Thank you also to Tracy for setting this up. We hope to see you all very soon. And hopefully the industry will recover very soon in the interest of everybody involved. Thank you.